This is going to be quite a loose, sort of unstructured chat, so everyone feels able to bring in their experience in the industry. We're not specifically trying to go through, a numbered list. So I think an obvious place to start is the fact that in songwriting at the moment there are so many successful female artists, and yet the percentage of female artists, for example, claiming from PRS is very, very low. So there's this imbalance, but in the media we're seeing a huge rise in attention to female artists. Adele's winning every award going, and it's a wonderful thing to be celebrated. But how, what's everyone's experience of that? Why now? Is it just something that was always going to come and the tables have turned, or do you think it's maybe a trend that, people will lose interest in a few years' time? What do these artists think?
I think it was funny before we were signed, we'd meet with labels, and all the labels were talking about Adele and trying to work out what had happened, how had that happened.
Yes.
And it was amazing, but at the same time, I still think there's only a handful of women that people are talking about, and the people in that list that you read are doing fantastic things, but very different things, but they get grouped together because they're women.
Because they're women.
Whereas you wouldn't group together male solo artists in the same way. So yeah, it's something that seems encouraging, but at the same time, it can still feel like you're one in a sea of many, many penises.
Thanks. Passing it to you now. Sea of penises.
So how is your penis sea, Deborah?
I think that it's really encouraging to see so many women icons for us all to look at and enjoy their music. But then the statistics of songwriting that we've all been given today show that actually it's the majority of songs are not being written by women. And in fact, it's a very small minority. And I think that's because of an inherent structure of the music industry, that there is a sexism around what's considered to be a song, who's considered to be a songwriter, what is songwriting, what is production, and all of that, which Grimes spoke about as well. So, for instance, lots of people, including you, have been in a room where, I think anyway, you get told, oh, do you want to write with this man or that man, or you need to write with somebody else, you need to be produced by this man, this man, this man. That's pretty common. Yeah. So men end up with a lot of rights on a lot of songs, and women are gradually giving away little percentage points all along the route. That's just my experience.
So to the casual observer, it seems like, great, there's now lots of women in the charts, women are out there doing music, but behind the scenes, vast parts of their revenue and those things, it's still male-dominated. So there's disparity between seeing all these women in the charts and...
The business of music is different to the charts.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mira, what's your take?
I'll grab this one. Well, I think we all know that the money is the power. So people making the money are the people with the actual control. Obviously, I think the two aspects of this, I think, all anthropological psychoanalysis kind of focuses on a view that we basically imitate what we see. So having a lot of women in the charts, having a lot of women who appear to be incredibly successful is very good for future generations, because if you see lots of women being successful, you're more likely to throw your hat in the ring. So on that aspect, it's very positive that we have seen this is really the last 5 years, this big, lots of female solo artists sort of having a lot of attention and success. But there is this aspect that a lot of those people, as they have through time, are not actually in control of their own careers or their own finances, because they're not actually the writers. They are quite often just the pretty face. So that aspect of it, of course, I think is incredibly negative, because it reinforces a stereotype that you need a pretty face to sell a product, and it is just about product.
Do any of you guys have any sort of thoughts on that subject?
I think you definitely need to encourage more female producers. I manage Playing to Rock, who writes all her own stuff, produces all her own stuff, makes her own videos, and she says it's, you know, there's probably 1-2% of producers that are women.
Yeah.
And I don't really know how to encourage that, really.
That's interesting. And has she talked about sort of assumptions that she's battled against?
I guess the same thing with DJing. There's not that many women DJs, and when she plays live, people always assume that she doesn't know what gear she's playing with because she's a woman.
Yeah.
So she's always fighting against that.
Yeah. But it's interesting, Mira, what you say about just seeing the women out there is such a good start for next generations, even if it's not exactly the media picture you want to see, or the background isn't quite the case you would like it to be. Just that thing of thinking, oh, there are women out there, we can do it.
Yeah, I think visibility has a very positive impact. That's all I can take from that, and I think it does, and you can see that when you meet younger women, and you also see the numbers going into music schools. I mean, this is another issue. Yeah. Why is the swing to women in at the Royal Academy and all music schools, and where do they get lost?
Is it?
Oh, absolutely.
So those are female-dominated degree courses?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think happens?
I don't know. I'm talking about classical music predominantly, and there have been things to try and counteract that. There have been blind auditions because there is there has been a kind of predisposition to think a female violinist will be weaker or softer. So they introduced blind auditions because orchestras are made up. The swing is to male musicians, and yet coming out of...
It's fascinating because you'd think an orchestra of all places, you'd sort of like to imagine that, you know, it would be sort of gender blind in a sense.
But because it hasn't, they took certain orchestras have taken very proactive and gone for positive discrimination, which is something that people fall into camps. I'm totally for positive discrimination because I think if I lived in an ideal world, you wouldn't need that, but I don't. Yeah.
So positive discrimination, we're talking about things like an all-female shortlist.
Yeah, and that can relate to race or gender or
absolutely.
Know.
Yeah. I'm all for it too. But some feminists would argue it's sort of making women a special case, and there's a certain neediness. I mean, what do you think about having all women shortlists for things? Kate.
Hello. I can't speak for classical music, but certainly when it comes to things like DJing and female producers, I think until that there's a fairer balance, and that goes for anything like you're saying. That we need to be supporting women until we equal out. Exactly. It's interesting about the whole visibility of producers and DJs being a reason why women aren't kind of taking it up as much. I think that's definitely true. I remember interviewing Annie Mac last year, and we had a conversation about why there were no female songwriters, no female kind of pop producers, and she was really interested in this idea. And there was all kinds of reasoning that came out of that, whether it's because women's minds work differently to guys, we're not as good as sort of focusing in on technology or whatever, or whether it is just because women don't realise that they can do that until they see people doing that. And she was saying, that she didn't realise that she could be a woman playing specialist dance music on Radio 1 until she heard, or on radio until she heard Marianne Hobbs. So it's about putting women in positions where they can kind of, educate and inform other women.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say, like I said, all the studies show, and this literally is from things like in the World Bank systems, if you see somebody who looks like you, and that can be your colour or your gender, doing something as a child, you will think you can do it. So there's, a lot of times people don't want to be seen as role models. We have a lot of pop stars who kind of say, I'm not a role model, whatever. But invariably, whether they like it or not, by being visible, you are seen by others. And that can have a huge impact.
Yeah.
I think as well, though, it's the definition of what a producer is a lot of people, I don't think they realise that
I wouldn't, at this sort of age where you're choosing careers, I wouldn't have had any clue at all.
And I definitely find that most people assume that the boy that I'm in the band with produces everything.
Yeah.
And that in order to be a producer, you have to have insane technical know-how, which some people do, some producers do, but quite a lot of the time you're working with an engineer who has all of that kind of knowledge. But yeah, people we work with assume that I don't know anything about production, but I am a producer. I produce our music with Jeremy, who's in the band with me. But there's never the option of working with a female producer. Whenever we're talking about who we're going to work with, a woman's name never, ever comes up. That's for remixes, for anything.
Yeah.
And I do think it's partly because you are left out of the discussion. When I'm around men talking about music and talking about gear and talking about engineering and producing, they never ever ask me. I have to be like, I actually
have an opinion.
Did that bit, so maybe I can tell you about that. And it's hard to put yourself out there and to do that when you're surrounded, when you're the only woman in a room full of men. It's very difficult.
And Deborah, you touched on an interesting. Yes, no, listen. Claire.
Well, as I manage producers, I think it's really interesting that most female producers are artists and songwriters, and that I think stems from women wanting to have control when they're making their own music. They realise that they can do that. They can be a producer and they can actually take control and do it themselves. I think someone who's been a great inspiration for me from when I was really young was Kate Bush.
Yeah.
And she was very groundbreaking in her time. She started to produce her own records in the sort of early 80s. But nothing much has changed really since then, and that's such a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, apart from the fact that women do produce their own records, there aren't any, apart from people like Linda Perry, and she's always the one that everyone mentions, that produce other people's work.
Yeah.
I mean, the only female engineer I know, I would love to manage a female producer or a female engineer.
You just haven't.
But I haven't found any.
Yeah.
I know one female engineer called Catherine Marks, and it's interesting if you put her name in Google, you just put Catherine Engineer in Google, her name's at the top. You don't have to put her surname, you just put her first name and engineer.
That's really interesting.
That's how few engineers there are. And I think ultimately that comes from the environment in a studio is very, very male, and it's I've talked to studio managers where they employ female engineers, and they say, but if a male band asks for a male engineer, then of course I'm going to comply, because it's all about the client, and some male bands don't like to work with female engineers because they can't be themselves, and they want to talk about whatever.
They want top bands.
Lad things, yeah. But that's where there needs to be a difference, because somebody needs to just go, no, it's not a male or a female job, it's just a job.
Yeah.
That's what needs to be broken down.
Yeah.
All of these jobs, producer, songwriter, artist, they're just a job, a creative job, and they shouldn't be gender-based. That's the problem.
Deborah, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just because in Gaggle we just did this project where we did this pop-up shop and we did all these workshops, and the most popular workshops we did were sound engineering for girls and studio sound engineering for women. They were both for women. We just had to have.
And these were sort of open. People could apply to come.
Yeah, people could just come. You didn't need Pro Tools, Logic, nothing. You just needed a brain. That was it.